Hello Gator Bait subscribers and welcome into Gator Bait TV. I'm Kassidy Hill and welcome to a new segment that I like to call Kassidy Attempts to Apply Logic to the Confoundment that we know as the college football playoff rankings. The latest rankings, the penultimate rankings, really are actually pretty cut and dry. We have a good idea of what's going to happen next week after the championship games if everything goes to plan. Of course, this is college football. Nothing goes to plan. However, the Florida Gators are all but assured 2 years in a row of a New Year's Six bowl game, given the recent Alabama loss to Auburn, which dropped the Tide all the way down to number 12, it's the lowest they've been in the rankings era. However, we are going to run through it real quick just to kind of give you a better idea of what happened, what should happen, and what ultimately probably will happen for not only all college football, but of course for what you care for, the Florida Gators. First of all, let's go over a little bit of the bowl game scenarios just to give you an idea, if you're just more of the casual observer, if you want to tune in when the bowl games go on and you still haven't quite figured out these playoff rankings since they only have been around for a few years, let me run through those real quick. There are 39 bowl games for the FBS. That is 6 New Year's Six bowl games, which of course means they're played on December 28th and New Year's Day. They're not all played on New Year's. And 33 additional bowl games. The New Year's Six are the 6 that you want to get to. Those are considered the big ones, the granddaddies, or in the case of the Rose Bowl, legitimately the granddaddy of them all. Those are the nice ones, and those are also the 6 that the playoffs rotate through. They are the sugar, the rose, the orange, the fiesta, the peach, and the cotton. Those are the ones that have been around the longest and therefore have the most prestige. The playoff games rotate between these 6 every year. And so this year, the 2 playoff games will be the Fiesta Bowl and the Peach Bowl. If you're a bowl game that is hosting the playoff game that year, that is your bowl game. If you are in the Peach Bowl, it means you're in the playoff. There's not a separate one. The national championship game also rotates amongst these 6, but it is the cities, not the bowl games themselves. So for example, this year, the national championship will be in New Orleans. That does not replace the Sugar Bowl. It just means that that city is the host, which means that not only does the LSU Tigers have a good chance of making the playoffs, they have a really good chance of being in a national championship in New Orleans, which means those docile and quiet Tiger fans known for putting together Bible studies are going to be descending upon the quaint little town in New Orleans, and there is absolutely nothing that can go wrong there. But that leaves the sugar, the rose, the orange, and the cotton. The sugar, the rose, and the orange all have bowl tie-in allegiances. If it's the Sugar Bowl, it is the SEC versus the Big 12. The rose is the Big 10 versus the Pac-12, and the orange is the ACC versus the highest rank between the Big 10, the SEC, or Notre Dame. If a team is in a playoff, that bowl game will take the next highest team from that ranking. So what does this mean based off this latest ranking? If everything goes to chalk according this weekend, Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson are pretty much shoe-ins for the college football playoff. Then you have Georgia at number 4, Utah at number 5, and Oklahoma number 6, Baylor number 7, Wisconsin number 8, and Florida number 9. The biggest thing for Florida here is that Penn State dropped below them in this latest rankings to number 10, because that leaves the Orange Bowl as a pretty good shoe-in for Florida. At this point, it almost seems like the least that could happen for the Gators is that they go to Miami for the Orange Bowl. That is because Ohio State is most likely to beat Wisconsin. When that happens, the Badgers will have 3 losses and will fall below Florida, but it is very unlikely that Penn State, who is sitting at home this weekend just like the Gators, would rise above Florida at that point, which means that, again, if the Orange Bowl is taking the highest ranked of the SEC, Big 10, or Notre Dame, Florida would be ahead of Penn State there. So what does this mean as far as chances? Let's just throw some scenarios out there. It's the Christmas season. Let's look at some possible miracles. And for me, that would mean going to the Sugar Bowl. It does not mean that I hate your team or like another one more. It just means that means I get to spend more time with my family at Christmas. It's purely selfish. And the Sugar Bowl is a little bit more prestigious than the Orange. So what would happen for Florida to get to the Sugar Bowl? One of 2 things. Actually, really just one thing. Georgia would need to beat LSU in this weekend's SEC championship game. Now, I'm going to give you a minute to catch your breath because I know my audience. I know who I'm talking to. The thought of Georgia getting into the playoffs again means that you can't spit without thinking about it, so get that out of your system. If Georgia beats LSU, both those teams are probably still going to the college football playoff. That would leave Florida as the highest ranked SEC team for the Sugar Bowl to take. What's likely going to happen? LSU is going to beat Georgia. Now, what happens if LSU beats Georgia like a redheaded stepchild in Kmart? Does that mean Georgia falls below Florida? Probably not, because they do still have that head-to-head over the Gators. And the Sugar would probably still take Georgia even though the Bulldogs played in that game last year. If this was something like the Cotton Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl or the Peach Bowl that doesn't have bowl allegiances, they're not going to take a team 2 years in a row. But since the SEC is required to get a since the SEC is required to get a team into the Sugar Bowl, then the Sugar Bowl would take Georgia, despite them playing in that game last year and losing to Texas. You can glory in that for a minute there, Gator fans. If Florida did get to the Sugar Bowl, though, or no matter which SEC team gets to the Sugar Bowl, they would most likely face Oklahoma or Baylor. Oklahoma and Baylor face off this weekend in the Big 12 championship. So the biggest wild card here is Utah. Utah is going to face Oregon this weekend in the Pac-12 championship. No matter what Utah does, it's not going to affect the bowl that Florida gets into, but it will most likely affect the opponent. If Oregon beats Utah, then whoever wins between Oklahoma and Baylor has a much better chance of getting into that Final Four spot, again, assuming that LSU beats Georgia. So again, let's just toss some scenarios out there. LSU beats Georgia. Georgia probably falls out of that 4th spot. That leaves a spot open for number 5 Utah, number 6 Oklahoma, or number 7 Baylor. Oklahoma and Baylor are going to play this weekend. Whoever wins that could feasibly jump Utah and get into that 4th spot, unless Utah just puts up such a show this weekend against Oregon that the playoff committee really can't keep that Pac-12 champion out. However, again, the Pac-12 is on a much down year, especially compared to the Big 12, and so the playoff committee is much more likely to take a Big 12 champion over the Pac-12 champion. But again, this is a committee of people. We have no idea what they're going to do. This is all just conjecture, but it's fun. Let's keep going. As we said, what Utah does will likely determine who Florida's opponent will be. So let's look at the Orange Bowl, which is where the Gators are more likely going to end up. The Orange Bowl takes, like we said, the highest ranked of the SEC, Big Ten, or Notre Dame versus the highest ranked not in the playoff of the ACC. Currently, Clemson in the ACC is in the top 4, and if they win this weekend, they're most likely going to stay in. It's hard to keep the defending national champion out when they're undefeated. But just for kicks and giggles, let's imagine a scenario where Virginia beats the Tigers this weekend. Then what happens? As we have all learned this week, thanks to Dabo, there's nothing the playoff committee would like more than to kick out little old Clemson. If they do, then Clemson is not going to fall so far that they're below Virginia, and Virginia currently ranked in the low 20s at 24, I believe. Let me double check my notes. At 23, Virginia at 23 is not going to jump up ahead of Clemson, who is currently at 3. That means Florida is most likely facing Clemson in the Orange Bowl. It's a high team to face. It's a high-powered offense. But as we saw last year in the Sugar Bowl, a lot of times that team that just missed the cups of the playoff is not really ready to put up a fight in a bowl game that at that point they consider meaningless. What does that mean, though, moving forward? Again, like we said, we don't know. All this is conjecture. It could all be for naught next week, but hopefully that helps explain the scenario a little bit better for you and to see what Florida is looking at, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a New Year's Six Bowl. There's really no scenario at this point where the Gators aren't in the Sugar Bowl or the Orange Bowl. So until then, stick with GatorBaitMedia.com and GatorBait TV. We will take you through all of it, every step of the way, up to the bowl game, through and after. Again, for GatorBait TV, I'm Kassidy Hill.